Hello, everybody. Welcome to the training using data imports, exports, and reports in ArchivesSpace. Some emails and websites said something about data cleanup. Well, it was a little off. It was a little too soon. Data cleanup will be in November on November 6th. So if you haven't already, you might want to take a look at that. So we're just going to be covering imports, exports, and reports in ArchivesSpace. I'm Malaka Kottman from the University of Kansas, and I'm joined today by my fellow trainer, Nancy Enikin from the Getty Center. In advance of this training, you received an email with an agenda for the training with links to all of the materials you will need to participate in this workshop and to continue learning after the training is over. We may not stick exactly to the agenda, but we will take the planned breaks included in the agenda at the appropriate time. Included in the course materials is a quick start guide you can use to supplement today's training. Test what you have learned today by using the guide and by creating examples within your own ArchivesSpace instance or in the ArchivesSpace sandbox available via our website. You can access the ArchivesSpace sandbox from the ArchivesSpace Getting Started website, which is linked in your guide with other useful resources. There is also a link to a training evaluation at the end of the agenda. We hope you complete at the end of this training. It's very helpful in helping us obviously improve and include information that you thought might be useful that we did not include. We are using Zoom webinar for this training, and your microphone and camera are both muted. If you'd like to ask questions of the trainer, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a general question or need some other form of assistance, please feel free to reach out in the chat. Some questions will be read and answered during allocated time for Q&A. We are using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training, which is version 3.5. If you are currently on an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, keep in mind some of the features you see today may not be available to you at home. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementation of ArchivesSpace at your organization. If you have a question or issue with your implementation, please email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. Also, keep in mind this workshop assumes familiarity with ArchivesSpace terminology and archival concepts. If you don't have this necessary background, I recommend reviewing the recording of a recent ArchivesSpace basics training linked on the ArchivesSpace Getting Started webpage. Finally, please keep in mind there are many participants in this workshop coming from a variety of institutions and experience levels. Remember that the ArchivesSpace Code of Conduct applies to all ArchivesSpace events, including virtual events. Please remember to be considerate and respectful in your interactions in the Q&A and chat. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will share screen 2. All right. Mainly I'm going to read this to you if you can't see it. ArchivesSpace allows import of data from standardized records as well as comma-separated value CSV data from spreadsheets. By importing legacy data, you can centralize the management of information about your collections within one application. The following file types can be imported. Encoded archival context, corporate bodies, persons, and families, fondly known as EAC CPF. That's an XML file format, and you could use that to import agent records. Encoded archival description, otherwise known as EAD, you could use that to import resource records. Mark XML, machine readable cataloging. You could use that to import resource records, accession records, agents and subjects from a bibliographic record, and just agent records. Comma-separated value CSV files. You could use those to import accession records, assessments records, digital object records, and location records. Let me think. You could also, let's see here, go here. The import templates can be found on the ArchivesSpace website under resources for users under migration, tools, and data mapping. And you scroll down here and it's data imports and export maps. So you could get the templates, but you could also get the maps in some cases. For example, the accession CSV map, it just goes to the template. So that's probably not very helpful, but you know, better than nothing. I guess I'll close that if that thing will get out of the way. And let's go to, I'm going to show you how to import some of the various formats. And we'll start with the EAC CPF. I don't actually use EAC CPF. So I'm going to get an EAC CPF record from Snack. So I'm at the record for Luther Johnson. You click on export and you say, oh, I want the EAC CPF XML. Oh, wait a minute, back. Because I have the XML, oh, it's up here somewhere, a plugin of XML reader, it opens that way. So I actually have to go here and then right click and say save link as, and save that somewhere. Let's see. Let's do ArchivesSpace. That's always good. And workshops, and this workshop would be great. And we'll save it there. All right. So now if I go here, you could see it's right here. If you wanted to read it, I could open it in Notepad and show you what that looks like. Ta-da! There's Luther Johnson. He has a bunch of variant names. He has some relations with other people that are also famous. So that's the record itself. Let's go to ArchivesSpace and download it. If you're familiar with ArchivesSpace, you know that there's in a lot of cases several different ways to do the same thing. So I'll show you the various methods to import, and we'll start with my favorite, the create menu. So under create, then you would go to background job, and then you would choose import data. Now this is very important and usually why your imports don't work. You have to check. You have to pick your import type and you have to pick it correctly. So I'm going to do an EAC CPF, so I will choose that. And then you could either click on the plus sign and scroll somewhere where your file is to locate it and add it here, or you could just drag and drop, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to grab this file, drag it there, and then you click on Start Job. All imports are background jobs, so you wait and wait and wait, and then you refresh the page. And then down here, it tells you all the records it created. These other two records are created because of the relationships, even though for Luther Johnson it was in the relationships and it's also the heading. So I'm going to click on here and this is the record it created. It has the ID from Snack and all those 4xx's. So you see it does come in. Like any import, I recommend always double checking it once it is in ArchivesSpace. You're going to probably need to revise the records in some manner as you import them. All right, now let's import an EAD record. For that one, we'll show you how to do it from the Browse menu. So you click on Browse, and then you choose Background Jobs, and you get here, and then you have to click on Create Job. You see why my favorite is just Create. So we do import data. All right, I have, let's see, let's go back here. I have a record from my repository for Wilt Chamberlain. So it's the Guide to Wilton and Chamberlain collection, et cetera, et cetera. It has all sorts of nifty information, archival objects, etc. So I'm going to import that record as an EAD. So I choose EAD here, and then I go and drag and drop it from there and start job. And then we wait a little while again. Now, if there is an error during your import, as you've probably seen with other background jobs, instead of this being green, it'll be pink. And this log would, in theory, tell you what's wrong. Sometimes the error messages are a little hard to interpret. I've found that if you post your error message, don't post the whole log, just the error message to the email listserv. A lot of people have also encountered that error and have figured out the solution. So that would be helpful if you can't figure it out on your own. So here is all the records that it created when it imported it. Anything that looks like a little grid, that's the actual resource record itself. And the rest of these are either agents, subjects, or archival objects. Like this one has a little person head, so that's probably an agent. You can obviously go in and search for Personal Papers of Wilt Chamberlain to open up the record, or you could just click here and it'll take you directly to the record, which is nice. So that's pretty much it for that. But let's go and look at what all it, obviously it put in the archival objects. It even brought in the boxes and all that stuff and created those. Let's go down here. It created the agents and the subjects. As long as, in theory, so don't come and say, oh, you were wrong if I'm wrong. In theory, it's supposed to look at the source and the rules and the authority ID if you have one. And if there's a record that matches that when you're importing like another record, it shouldn't create a duplicate agent. But I'll tell you that you'll probably have, if you have a project to import a lot of records, you're probably going to have a lot of duplicate authorities because you probably won't have you wouldn't have coded them the same in all your records, likely, and so you'll need to go and do some cleanup there. All right, moving on, we're going to import a Mark XML record. So you could also get to the import menu by clicking on the down arrow next to your repository name and click on background jobs there, and then create job and import data. So you can import resource record, session records, subjects and agent only records. And so we'll demo briefly each of them. So a resource record, you have to choose Mark XML bibliographic, and you'll see it says resource in parentheses. So you do that, and then we're going to import the record. Go ahead and get rid of that. The one I want to do is this record for Sturgeon. And you start the job. And yay, it works. I will tell you that I had to do some tweaking of this record because again, this is another record that I just exported from our system. So you would think that it would just go right into the new system, but it doesn't. In our 300 line on the Mark XML, let's see if I have. Dun, dun, dun. Edit with note. Yeah, so here's the 300 line. We put the number of boxes. So like if you saw the XML, the Mark record, it would have said 31 linear feet, and then parentheses, it would have said like 36 boxes or something in parentheses. I had to take that off for this record to go in. And that's because it's a newer version of ArchivesSpace than the one I have. And they have adjusted some things so that I guess bad data doesn't get in. So it has to match what's in your, what do you call it up here? It has to match your controlled values list for extents, for example, exactly. Otherwise, it will give you an error. So that's new to me. So I clicked on refresh so I could see what was added. And like I said, the one with the grid is the actual record. So I have Papers of Theodore Sturgeon. Keep in mind, this is the MARC record, which does not have archival objects attached. So that's why it looks very bare bones. It did bring in the dates and all sorts of agents and a subject heading and some notes. Our scope note and our abstract. So it does bring in a lot of data, so you don't have to type it all in again. Now let's go and do an accession record. Control home. I'm going to use the create background job and then import data again, since I've shown you all the different ways you could get there. So if we do mark XML accession, so I'm going to import that very same record, which is not in that file, is it? So the Sturgeon file as mark 21, but since I'm telling it it's an accession record, that should be what it creates in ArchivesSpace. And refresh page. And now I could click on here, and here is an accession record based on that very same bib record. So I could now, if I wanted to, I could click on edit and I could relate the accession record to a resource record and have them Sturgeon and save that. And ta-da, now they're linked and I didn't have to do a lot of typing. Yay! Now, some people like to put in a whole bunch of subject headings and agent records and then link them to the appropriate resource record that may or may not already be in ArchivesSpace. And that's a valid workflow. And there is an easy way to get agent and subject records into the file without having to actually import a resource record. It's kind of odd, but let's look at, do I have the Tibbetts record? Yes. So here's a record for a finding aid for John C. Tibbetts papers, but you'll notice here it has oodles and oodles of 650s. I don't want to have to add those one by one by one. And I already have this EAD in there. I just don't have, for example, the agent and subject records. So what I could do is take this Mark 21 record and I could import it. And we'll go here to create background job, import data. And then I could do mark XML, bibliographic, subjects, and agents only. And drag that one in. Right, MS 325, yeah. And start that job. And you'll notice this log You do have to have a valid Mark XML record, so you can't just, throw up an easy peasy record. But you can, it would have to have like a unique identifier, for example. Otherwise, it would have a cow, even though you're not adding it as a resource record. But after that, then it only does the subjects and agents. So when I click on refresh page, the records that are added are just the 650s and 600s and 700s. So you could go and look at those. And as long as you had them coded correctly in your Mark XML, they'll create records like these. So that's an easy way. I mean, you could just, mock up a resource record as a XML and just throw on 100 different subject headings and import it this way, and they'll create them for you. So that's another way that you could get subject and agent records in, is to use this NAF plugin. So you click on the down arrow and then it says plugins and you got LC NAF import. So when you click that, you get a choice of the LC NAF or LCSH. And they always have this note up here because sometimes you go, oh my God, it's not working. It's not necessarily your ArchivesSpace implementation. What you want to do is take this URL and go there and see if it actually is up. I'm not saying it's frequently down, but I would say at least a few times a year it does go down for random reasons. So it could be that it's just down. For LCA-NAF names, you can type in the name that you want to do. This is a keyword search, so you do not have to do last name, comma, first name. You could just do Andre Norton, and it will find the record an hour later. There. So it found the record without me having to do Norton, comma, Andre. You could also, if you if you have the authority record number that's in the 010 of the authority record, you could just type that number in, removing any spaces. So like this one, the number you would see in the 010 is 801262299 with a space. You won't be able to find it that way. You'll need to actually remove that space, and then you could do a search and you get just the record you want. If you click on select here, it'll move it there. But if you wanted to look at the record prior to importing it, you could just click on the name and it opens it up in Mark XML in this window. So you could look at it that way and go, yes, that's the right Andre Norton. So now it's over here and it's queued up. If I don't want it, I would click on the garbage can and that would get rid of it. And they have, for the last 2 versions, I think, they've had this import related subjects checkbox. As some of you may know, NAF records, name authority file records, they add 3 XX fields that'll have like their profession, qualifiers, their place of birth, and those sort of things. Well, if this is checked, then when this record is imported, all of those 3 XXs, the information in those fields will be used to create subject or agent records. And they won't be, they won't have all the cross references, for example, that if you actually imported that record for real, as its own thing would have been there. So I usually turn it off. I don't really want those. And so then you click on import. And again, it's a background job. So you click on that and click on refresh. And ta-da, Andre Norton is there. And she has a bunch of cross references, including some in Russian. How about that? And those were created. You could also create or import subject headings using this. So LCSH. You don't use the rest of the name, you just use the primary name, and it's keyword search just like the agents, so you could just type it in however you want and then do a search. And I got made for TV movies. I could look at the record and go, oh, yay, made for TV movies. And you'll notice it has a whole bunch of 4xx's, but subject headings in ArchivesSpace don't allow for cross-references, so this will only import the 150 form of the heading from the record. So, ta-da, made for TV movies. All right. There is yet another way to do authority records importing. If you have a MARC XML authority record, you could import that just like we did the EAC CPF record. And I do have one. Let's take a look at it. I used Hillary Clinton. And so that one has a lot of information, which is why I used it, because it just goes on for miles and miles and miles. So we could import that. And that one was MARC XML as opposed to EAC CPF. So I could go here, background job, import data, and I could choose MARC XML authority agents and could move that file. Now I'm only doing one file at a time. You could drag and drop multiple files if you want. And if you accidentally import, if you put one file that you didn't mean to, the trash can will get rid of it. So we'll start the job. And refresh the page. And ta-da! In this case, I didn't select don't create all those weird headings, so it did create all those headings from the 3xx field. So you could go down here. Well, you saw all those numbers, the sources. So here's all her cross-references, tons. And then here is the 3xx's that were added. So agent, place, role, residence. So based on the tagging in the record, if it maps to something that exists in ArchivesSpace, then you'll see that. Like this will say place of birth, yeah. So that's handy if you need it. Now we'll get to all the stuff you really came here for, the importing from spreadsheets. That's always challenging. So I showed you earlier from the ArchivesSpace website, you could go in and download those templates, but in newer versions of ArchivesSpace, they also have the templates available within ArchivesSpace itself. So you would click on the gear menu and you would click on bulk import templates. And all the templates that they have are listed here, and you could click on download and use those. I recommend using this one rather than the website itself, because these will be the most up-to-date, the latest and greatest. For example, the bulk import digital objects and probably the digital object CSV were had to be updated not too long ago, because we now have the digital objects have where you could make a representative functionality in it. So it did change the spreadsheets. So if you have older spreadsheets before that functionality was added, and then you tried to load them in this version, they won't work. So always good to be up to date. That could be one of the, you get errors when you load things. So that could be one of your errors, is that you don't have the most up-to-date import profiles, import templates. You'll see some of these say CSV and some say XLSX. If I recommend using the XLSX anytime it's available, but it's not available for the accessions, the assessments, the digital objects, the location, and the subjects. So I will show you how to do an accession CSV, and you could just, I'm not going to do all the other ones. It's like once you know how to do one, you kind of know how to do them all. So I click on download the accession import thing, go to the folder because it's in here. Let's open it up and take a look at it. Just like you, for 9 times out of 10, the CSV file is going to open up in Excel. I probably do have a different CSV a program that could open CSV, but I usually use Excel. So you're going to get this record. It has sample data in row 2, and it has these headers in row 1 so that you could see, oh, this is a session title, this is a session number 1, 2, etc. So for CSVs, now this is not true for the XLSX, it's just for CSVs. The order of these fields is important. You can delete fields that you're not using. So if like I'm not using number 4, I could just delete it, or I could hide it if I want to. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure that the remaining fields follow the same order as the template. So if I wiped out all of these fields, that's fine as long as the next field in line is in the correct order. It's weird. Values in date 1 and date 1 type and date 1 label should be lowercase. For example, creation and with a small c instead of creation with a capital C. Check the dependencies of fields. For example, if you use the extent container summary, you must also include the extent number and the extent type. Now, since this is CSV, it does not give you any pretty pictures like, oh, in red, this means it's a required field. You're going to have to know how to use ArchivesSpace and determine what fields are required versus what fields are optional, and then fill this thing out accordingly. So that's what one looks like when you first open it. I have, of course, created one with a couple of extra. So I still have the Office of Student Affairs records, but I also added a couple of other ones, the Tibbetts papers and the Sherrod papers. So I have so this would be the identifier number. So I have that there, the date, the accession date that it was added, access restrictions. 1 equals true, 0 equals false. Gift is there. And that one, materials are in fair condition for the description. And the rest of the stuff is pretty self-explanatory. I did want to show you, so like here is the processing hours total, and it'll add that to the record when I put it in. Cubic feet, this again is, let's see, if we go to ArchivesSpace and system controlled values, this is from the controlled value menu for extent type. Yes. So you would use the value, not the translation. So you'll notice the value is lowercase letters and has the underscore, whereas the translation is capital letters and has a space. And I want to go all the way over here to agents. So the sample line had a creator, agent person, has an address, and they entered the agent name as Black, Allison, which in ArchivesSpace, they like to separate those into two fields. So you would have the last name and then you would have the first name in a separate field. So I've done that with Tibbetts and Gunn. And we'll take a look at those when they come back in, because obviously I wouldn't mention it if it was going to work correctly. So that's the accession record from a spreadsheet. I'm not going to save it. I'm going to go here to create background job, import data, and we'll do an accession CSV and sample. Ta-dum. And I will start the job. And it did work. We'll click on refresh page. And so you'll notice it did create Black, Allison, but Tibbetts and Gunn are just single words here. We'll go and actually look at the record. So John C. Tibbetts papers. So we have a session record, and it put in all the fields and the creation date, but you'll notice the agent link just says Tibbetts. If I click on here and view, and now I'm at the authority record, the agent record, you'll notice that it did put in the primary part of the name is Tibbetts and the rest of the name is John C. So it got the data in there. It's just that, let's go to edit and go down here to name forms. For whatever reason, the system generates when saved. Let's unclick that. It has the sort name as Tibbetts, and your sort name is what displays up here. So one, I would need to publish this if I wanted it published. Two, I would need to actually fix this manually. Even if I if I didn't do anything to it and just saved it again, it wouldn't work. I would have to actually come down here and change this and do save person. So it's up to you. Do you want to come back into ArchivesSpace and fix that? Or do you want to put everything in the primary name so at least it displays? Obviously it's a bug and I will report it. So it's always good to do these training sessions. We learn so much. I think that's it for the accession records. The digital objects and the location CSVs, like I said, are similar. You would just download them, fill them out, and import them. So let's go to this thing and go to page 5 and importing archival objects from Excel or CSV. I recommend reading this because it lists all the templates and it tells you which one to use. Especially, it'll tell you to use the XSLXX like I mentioned. But it's the required columns that you're going to want to read about. And we'll go through those on a real one. Let's see. We'll go back to ArchivesSpace. Okay, let's go here to our templates. Okay, so we got bulk import archival objects, and we got bulk import digital objects. For the archival objects, you will be creating, obviously, archival objects. You could also at the same time create and link digital objects in the archival objects spreadsheet. So you don't have to use two different spreadsheets. The bulk import digital object creates and links digital objects to existing archival objects in a resource. So use the archival objects one if you have digital objects that don't exist yet and archival objects that don't exist yet. And for the digital objects one, you would use that when you have an archival object, but you want to add the digital object to it. I'm going to just demonstrate the bulk import of archival objects. So let's download that page. And here it is. All right, so unlike the CSV, you get a lot of pretty colors in an Excel spreadsheet. So a true Excel spreadsheet. So that's very helpful. Show those headers drop down. So you got guides, sort of mapping of what goes where. Some of these fields will have drop downs already in them, which of course, if you have some other type that you added, you could edit this spreadsheet to have added here. The things in red are required. And yeah, it goes on for miles. It's designed to be flexible enough to accommodate different workflows. The first row is the place where you can put identifying information such as foo collection, as long as you don't edit or delete the row that's marked ArchivesSpace field code. So this row, don't edit it, don't do anything to it. It has to stay exactly like this. But you could hide, delete, or rearrange columns to suit your workflow. So you'll notice that up here, for example, it says A, nothing C. That's because the B column is actually hidden. So I could unhide it. And now it shows up if I want it to. When filling these out, there's a lot of fields that I don't use, like the checksum and all that stuff. Yeah, you could hide that. I recommend hiding rather than deleting. That way you're sure it's not something that you did by rearranging the order, as far as why the spreadsheet doesn't go in. The user manual, the ArchivesSpace user manual, has instructions for how to add additional columns for some of these fields. So obviously you might have 10 or 12 agents attached to something and you only have room for 3 on here. It'll tell you how to add additional columns for that. The required fields are in red. So you either need an EAD or a resource ID. You need a title or a date, which is over here, just like you do on a regular record. Hierarchical relationships. That's like trying to explain how to tie your shoe. You're going to use the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The first level is a 1. And then the second level is a 2 and 3. So it's similar to if you were doing the CO tags, it would be 1, 2, 3, depending on how you want those nested. The other thing of import is, let's go here and look up Sturgeon again. And we'll open up the resource record. So this one, if I was going to add a spreadsheet here, it doesn't have existing archival objects. So of course, I would add it at the Papers of Theodore Sturgeon level. But if I had one that had archival objects, which is this one. So this one has archival objects. So let's say I wanted to add archival objects under the series organizations. I would have that series open, and then I would load the spreadsheet from there. So the 1, if I put a 1 in under here, it would create a child record under organizations in that hierarchical level. If I put a 2, then, well, hopefully it would have a 1. So if I did a, so yeah, a 2 would go under, it would be, so we got a sub-series and then we would have a sub-sub-series and then a sub-sub-sub-series. So experiment is all I could say with this hierarchical relationship. to see where you want these things to go. I need to go to ArchivesSpace again, and we're going to actually create a spreadsheet to add archival objects to our papers of Theodore Sturgeon. So I either need an EAD, ID, or a resource URI. The resource URI on the record, where is it? Oh, there it is. Is this thing. So it would be this, the 26. You wouldn't have the edit, so it would just be the up to the 26. You could put that in, but the easiest thing to do is here in finding aid data, if you put an EAD ID in here, then it'll match that way. So that's what I'm going to do instead of the URI. ksrl.sc.sturgeondore. And nope, D-O. Yeah, that's better. And then I'll save the resource. So now I have an EAD ID in here. And so let's go here. So what I would want to do is type in ksrl.sc.sturgeon. So I do that. And I don't need the resource ID. So it's one of those either or. You either need this one or you need that one, but you don't need both. I'm actually going to do a title called manuscripts. Here, I'm going to do the hierarchy as 1 because I want it to be the series level. So I would do series here. And I want the publish to be false. Note the selected value. The default, I believe, is false, but if you're one of those better safe than sorries, you could always just fill it out. So that's that line, and that's all I need for a series level record in ArchivesSpace. So now the beauty of the spreadsheet, I don't have to type this in again. I could just drag it down and ta-da, it's there. So now I'm going to do another line. I'm going to make this a 2 because I want to make it a subseries or a file actually. And the description level here will be file. My title will be Delaney Samuel R. DHALGREN. That's title. Period, cover, proof. The date. Scroll way over here. Date label default is creation, so I don't have to put anything in this box. And remember, it's line 7 and not line 6, so that's where it starts getting a little wonky. My begin date will be 1973. I don't need an end date because my date type is going to be single. All right. Now let's go over here to containers. Date. We got extent, dimension. Okay, container. The ingester will try to find an already created top container in the database if I put anything in that top container box here. If I have defined a barcode in the spreadsheet, if there's a match for the barcode for that resource, that top container will be used without further checking. Otherwise, a new top container will be created. If I've not defined a barcode, the type and indicator will be used to search the database for a top container that is already associated with this particular resource. Otherwise, a new top container will be created. As you guys saw, I have no top containers at all attached to this resource, so it will just create them as we go along. So container instance type, where did it go? Dun, dun. No, that's extent. We'll just open the one that's already done. make that. So sample, I have it, this one, I think. And will it open? Yes. Okay. So I have this already filled out. Delaney with the Dahlgren, it's a 2. There's also Watson will be a 2, Benson, Belkin, the papers. So it has some series and it has some subseries. Now we'll move over some to the next thing that's filled out. I do have that 1973 and single filled out. And here we go. The container type, that is important. Mixed materials. Remember I showed you the vocabulary, and it was small letters with the underscore for the value rather than a translation. I believe you could use either the value or the translation, but I prefer to use the value. So that's why that is in lowercase. The top container is a box for most of these, except for, yeah, so they're all in boxes, even the books. Top container ID, I have box 1, box 2, and box 3. The child types are folders, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, the beauty of Excel is I didn't have to type 1, 2, 3, 4. I could just drag it down and it would add that information. The other thing I've done is put in the, what do you call it? Digital object. So here is a URL for the representative file version. It has to start with HTTP. Now these start with HTTPS's, which do start with HTTP, so that's fine. You need to fill out the Xlink attribute. The previous version of the template, the default was on request, so that's what I used. You have to fill in the Xlink show attribute. The previous version was new, so I filled that in. And then I wanted a caption, and so I put those in also. So let's go load this spreadsheet. Ta-dum. And we don't save that. Okay, so with where you want to load this in your resource record highlighted, open. So I'm open at Papers of Theodore Sturgeon. If I had additional archival objects that I wanted to put it under, I would be under that and put it there. So here, then you would click on Load via Spreadsheet. Now, I recommend that you click on Only Validate here. You get a choice. We're importing archival objects. If I was using the digital objects, if I was adding digital objects to archival objects and I was using that spreadsheet, I would select that. And if I was using the link top containers, I would use that. So we're going to import archival objects, but I only want to validate it. I don't want to actually do it because I might have made a mistake. So here you can't drag and drop, which is very sad. You have to click on the plus sign. So we'll go up here to the sample imports and that one and open it. And I go import from spreadsheet and 4 days later. Okay, I had no errors as far as I know. So I click on refresh, and then what I want to do is download this report. And then I'm going to go ahead and open that report. And it tells you what it did. So this info and error thing, and the ref ID, tells you, so it created the top container, it created a digital object, it created another digital object, and now it's moved on to box 2 and it created that. And it created box 3 and it created a digital object. Now you'll notice that the Jose looks weird. Remember, this is a CSV, and so it's got ASCII text and not Unicode text. But in my spreadsheet, the Jose does have the accent on it, and we'll see if it actually goes in correctly. It should. So I will close that. And again, I won't save. So now that I'm sure it won't have any problems and it's doing what I think it should be doing, I could go back to my record and search that and edit mode, load via spreadsheet, and select file and that, and open and import. Ta-da. Refresh page. And in this case, I actually get a report of everything it's created. So I'm going to click on manuscripts so I could actually get to the record. And ta-da, it created my 3 series, the stuff that was under the series, and it even did the digital objects. So if I go, oh, and it did put Jose with the E as opposed to the A thing. So I click on Samuel Delaney, and I'm going to go down to instances, and you'll see that it created a box 1, and it created the digital object record. Let's look at the digital object record. It created it, it gave it, because I didn't fill out a title in that spreadsheet, it's going to give it the same title as the archival object. So it inherits the publish information from the other records, so you don't have to worry about that. And it put in the URI in the file versions here and all that good stuff so that I don't have to. Yay! You'll notice that every time I did this thing, it opened up a brand new tab. So then you end up having to go and close things all the time. So that is how to input archival objects. And for the final thing, I know you're going to have lots of questions about this. You just got to experiment. It's similar to using, well, it's not similar to using rapid data entry, but if you use rapid data entry, you know you have to experiment because half the time it works and the other half of the time it doesn't, which is why the validation thing is there. So let's go and import and link top containers. So you can import and link top containers via spreadsheet to existing archival objects. This is helpful if your workflow is to create the archival object and then later figure out what box or folder numbering is and where everything has been sorted. So the restrictions on this is a spreadsheet can only link to archival objects within a single resource. An existing top container cannot be changed by the process, including by adding container profiles or location. An archival object cannot be changed by this process other than the creation of a new container instance. So let's go to Rodriguez and edit that. So I've added just some bogus archival objects, but none of them have top containers except for that very first one. So this one does have a top container. To create these top containers, what you're going to want to do is download the container template, and that is on this export. Scooch this up some. There, this export menu. So you got download all of these things, but you could download a container template. So I clicked on that, and of course it goes straight to my download folder. It's a CSV, so it's all text, and it just looks wonky. So the first 4 rows, otherwise known as 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, and D, these are for contexts and should not be deleted at all. These are the container IDs, or no, they're the reference IDs, or so that it puts things where it's supposed to go. And this is the archival object ID. Again, so it's similar. It's just doing double duty. You could have this or you could have this, and they put both of them in to make sure it goes in the right spot. So columns B through H have information about the archival objects. Leave these rows as is. Don't change them. And then we're going to add our container information to I through R. Here's the field that you use. So this would be the instance type, the top container ID, etc., etc. Barcode, container profile if you want, child type, child indicator, etc. Let's open up the version I already filled out so you could see what's going on. If there is a row that you do not want to have a container attached to it, you would delete that row. If there's a row that already has a container attached to it, you would delete that row. Now remember, I had a top container linked to that first record folder. And so I want the rest of these to be in that same box. It's just I want it to be folder 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I need to put in the top container ID. To get the top container ID, I would go to the record here, and then I'm going to go to instance, and then I'm going to click on here and view that. And up here where it says blah, 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 and the last thing is the number 358, that's the number you're going to put in the spreadsheet if you have an existing top container and you just want to continue adding to that box. So yeah. Now we're back to there. Okay, so that's where that number came from. So I want 358, and then I want the child type to be folder for all of these. So again, you could just drag it down. Child indicator 2, 3, 4 through 10. And then I'm going to create box 2. Since it doesn't already exist, I would just put in top container type of box, and then I would give it the number of 2. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm moving on to box 3, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that is, I took out the series info. It's weird, right? So the series information comes first, and none of those do I want boxes. So that's why I deleted those. This birth certificate is the one that already has a box. So I took that out. And then the rest of these, because, well, from here to here, you'll see it doesn't have anything as a title. That's because we use the date instead for the title. So these numbers here, if you want to make sure you're matching them up correctly, let's go to archival objects. 1980, for example. This ref ID, blah, 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 AA. So if I go here, make this bigger. This one is the 1980. So that number matches. So it does put them in order. So at least you don't have to keep going back and forth to make sure that you got them all. But if you need to, that's where that number comes from. I think we're ready to load it. So let me close it. And go here to import, delete rows of archival object, save and import. Go up here to Ernest Rodriguez paper. And then we want to load via spreadsheet. And we want to link top containers. We could validate and we could select a file. Oh, there it is. I was like, what was it called again? And we import from spreadsheet. Validating. Refresh page. And we could look at the file and see what it says. Well, that's interesting. Download. Huh. Well, in theory, you could have looked at the file. The log says that it sort of worked. At least it didn't give me any errors. So let's go here and we'll go back to Rodriguez, search and edit and load via spreadsheet. And this time we won't validate, we'll just load it and keep our fingers crossed that it works. Import. Ta-da. Oh, it did not work. Compiling results, CSV file. Download report.
If I can, I think you forgot when you hit the import, I think you forgot to actually grab the last option, load containers. I think it was trying to load archival objects.
Yeah, I thought that just as you said that. I'm always doing that. All right. Let's
I've
go.
done it too.
That's why I said on that other one, you got to make sure you get the right thing. All right. Load via spreadsheet, link top containers, select the file, and Rodriguez, and import. That looks a little better. Refresh page. And we could go to one of these. And now I have boxes everywhere. Yay, including the box one. So that's it. That's all I got. I guess we could try for questions.
And we have some questions. So they're going back, and I've actually marked a lot of them so that we can answer them live so everyone can hear. And so I'm going to kind of run through them in order. There are 3 earlier on about agents. And so I'll kind of group those. So one is, will ArchivesSpace throw an error if there's already a duplicate agent record when you're loading agents?
No, I don't believe it does. I think it just doesn't load it because it's already there.
And my experience has been if it's got, especially if it has like the LC identifier, if it doesn't have that, then it may not know it's a duplicate.
Yep.
Yeah. Then next one, is there a way to import agent subjects that would be attached to a particular resource record, or do they need to be linked manually after import? And I believe this was asked during the phrase when we were simply importing agent records.
If you're loading a mark XML record as a resource, for example, or an EAD record as a resource, and in those records you have agents or subjects, those will come over and they will already be linked. But for example, like if I had a resource record that had Hillary Clinton, it would create that Hillary Clinton agent record, but it certainly would not have all of those cross references that are actually in the NAF, for example.
Yeah. And so I'm closing these out as you're entering them. And then there is one, I believe the answer is no, but it's again for everybody to hear. Is it possible to update existing agent or subject records using the import template?
No. No, usually what I do is I add them. So, Hillary Clinton, Andre Norton, because it's already on the resource record. I import it in. Then I use that LCNAF plugin thing and I bring in the real record that I want and then I merge them. So, yeah.
Yep. And then there are two questions basically asking sort of the same thing. Could you share why you recommend the XLSX template over the CSV when available?
That's because the Excel spreadsheet has all these pretty colors, and gives you visual clues of what's required and not required. Whereas, and it has the mapping information so that you go, oh, this field is supposed to be level of description, series, etc., and has examples. Whereas the CSV is just bare bones. You really need to know what you're doing when you're using that one.
Yeah, so if you're very confident with XSL and you're fundamental, you know what you're bringing down, and your purpose is really just to really munge that data without like the silent date formatting and some of the, cell and column formatting that can be a little aggressive, then CSV might be a better option. But again, depending on what you want to do, the Excel version might be preferable for some folks. And please chime in on chats and various things if we're not answering the questions for you, or if you have a follow-up. So I'm going to close those two. And so for some of okay, so next one, I believe you answered this in the course of your discussion, but just to reiterate it for everyone, someone said they had an experience where they were importing archival object CSV and it was always creating new top containers instead of linking to the existing top container. And I believe you addressed that by saying that if there's a barcode and you include that, then it will map to the existing top container, but without the barcode, it will create a new one. So I think that's the answer to why this person was experiencing this issue, where new top containers were constantly being created rather than mapping.
Yeah, that's your best bet, is to use the barcodes if you're
And yeah,
got existing.
if you don't have barcodes and you are creating new top containers, you can, it's a bit of a pain. You can always go into the manage top container section of the system and then merge those top containers later. So that would be a way around it if you're not using barcodes. There's a question about, are bulk import templates only updated on the newest version of ArchivesSpace, or are they also updated on older versions? This person is saying they're on version 3.3.1, and they just downloaded the bulk import archival object Excel, and it only has 7 files. My suspicion is that as the new releases come out, where there are needed updates to the templates are probably kept more current with the most recent release, but it may not be that updates are required for the templates on each release. So yeah,
they're supposed to be backwards compatible, so
yeah,
the new one will work on everything, but an old one will not work on a new
yeah.
installation.
So that's that one. Is there a way to ingest new subjects in an archival object CSV along with their authority ID and source? This person is saying that they haven't been able to do that, so they've been making new subject records and then putting their IDs into the spreadsheet instead.
Well, I think if you put in the attribute, and I don't know if that's valid XML. I mean, I think you could do it certainly via an EAD, because they do have the ID as an attribute. So if you put that ID in the attribute of your EAD, then it should come over into the subject authority record, I believe. I've never tried it, but that's the theory.
Okay. And more questions are coming in. So let me keep going through the ones that existed. I think some of the next questions have to do with the top container import. And a couple of them are about if you already, for example, I think they have to do with updating container information in both cases, or overriding and changing existing box numbers.
You
And
can't do that.
you can't do that. So all it can do is sort of what you showed. It
Yeah.
can't change an existing top container. So you or alter those. So
You would need to use the manage top container thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, box numbers are changing. You can't reflect that. I'm sorry, I'm just looking over the questions again, making sure I'm catching everything. But yeah, changing the top container in some fashion, that top container import cannot do that. And there was a third one about that. I think override existing top containers. Yeah, you can't do that. Could you talk a little more about the difference between the bulk import digital object CSV XLS and the digital object CSV?
The digital object CSV creates the digital object records, and records link to digital objects like an agent, subject, and event. So let's see, we should have a couple of digital objects. So in a digital object, you could actually have subjects and agents. So you could have it just create. So this wouldn't be linking to an archival object. It would just be creating a digital object. And then if you also want agents and subjects linked to your digital object, you could put that into the CSV. What was the other one? Bulk import templates. The bulk import digital objects, that creates and links digital objects to existing archival objects in a resource. So you would already have, for example, that Sturgeon one, it already has archival objects. And if I wanted to add digital objects to that, then I would use this import thing. Only I would use the Excel as opposed to the CSV, but that's because. Did that answer it, Nancy?
I believe so. I will see if a follow-up question comes through the Q&A. So the next one, this is a little off topic, but I'll go ahead and address it. Are there any plans to be able to export resources as CSV files? I personally do not know the answer to that.
I don't know anything about that.
If a request had gone in for future development. That's probably a future development question.
Yeah, I mean, I could see where you could probably do your own mapping of, downloading a EAD and converting it to a CSV or some sort, but yeah. I have not heard of anything and seen anything in Jira about that.
And then, is there a way to bulk upload container profiles? I don't think I know of one, unless you were to use something like the API.
Yeah, you could certainly use the API. But yeah.
But otherwise, I don't know of a front-end importer that would do that.
Yeah, they just have the create. They don't have any. Now you could download the CSV and get a list.
Let me see.
I think we should probably try to answer the rest of these in writing so that we could have our 10-minute break.
Yep.
So that, because reports are going to be fun.
Well, they're a little interesting. Just as a basic for the person who is interested in where to see what version of ArchivesSpace you're using, if you go to like ArchivesSpace Home, the main screen, there should be a display down toward the bottom of which version you're on. So I think Malaka just highlighted it there.
And if you're the administrator, system information, I believe, will also tell you what version you're on. But I don't know that everybody gets the system information on their drop-down menu.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then again, I think one person had a follow-up question, and it's about box numbers and updating the container information using the bulk import template. You can't update the box numbers. So yeah, I don't think that will work. And there's one other question that we may have to come back to later again, just so you get to your break.
Yep.
All right, we'll be back in at 5. Sorry, I'm
32.
translating time. Yep, there we go. 10:35, whatever time it is at the 35, whatever hour it is where you are.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm just hoping everyone is back. I'm Nancy, and we're going to pick up with exports and then reports. And I think I've shared my screen. Please let me know if anyone can't see it. And I'm just hiding my meeting controls so I can actually see my screen. So, all right. So this second half is going to be, we're going to be discussing the opposite of what we just did, which is the exports. And we're going to spend some time on reports. As part of that, we'll look at some of the built-in administrative reports, the custom reports, and then just as an example of something you can do outside of the system, I'll pull up something I use on the side to point at the back-end tables to pull data out and play with it. So just to start with this, I want to a few setup things, things to pay attention to as we get to reports in a minute. Just so you know, in the back end, you actually have to have this enabled with your system administrator or your hosting provider to turn on the custom report functionality. So you'll see it here. If you can't see it in your implementation, that might be something that you need to look into. And then even with that enabled, there are some permissions that have to be set, or that we have to make sure are set up. And so just to run through those initially, if you are, I'm logged in as an administrator, so I can basically do everything possible in the front end across all repositories. But if you're in as anything lower than that, you're going to want to come to your permissions over here, and we manage users or manage groups. I've opened manage groups here, and I've picked, in this case, the managers of this particular repository. And as you look down, I believe this is sort of out of the box, I believe, right now. And so whenever you're upgrading, whenever there's new functionality involved, it's always a good idea to come in and take a look at the permissions. Oddly, this one has create and run a background job is not selected, but cancel a background job is. You probably want both, especially as a manager. You also will find initiate import jobs and cancel import jobs. And again, you probably want both. And then down at the very bottom, manage custom report templates. And you would want that selected. And then again, depending on who your users are, who your groups, what your groups are, you may want to tweak these as appropriate for your staff. So just wanted to sort of point this out. The changes I'm making here won't have any impact on what I'm doing, again, because I'm in here as an administrator. But just watch these. And so as we're going to walk through exports, we're going to start, I'm going to kind of walk through module by module. And there are some things you can do across all modules. We're going to start there. So I'm going to go to accessions. And in this case, we're going to talk about download CSV. And this can be done across all of the modules. A few, like resources, digital objects, agents, actually have additional export capacity within the module itself. But for a number of them, the only option is the download CSV. And what happens with this is what it will do is download the CSV of everything that appears in your search results screen. So in this case, it would download all of these potential fields as columns. If I wanted to add additional columns, I can. If I come over to preferences and set the browse result preferences. So I've already got a screen for that. This screen, I've got a screen for that open. So in this case, again, depending on if it's personal repository or default preferences, if I come down and say for the accession browse columns, this is the default that shows up. I could change these. I could rearrange the order of the columns here. In this case, I could add some additional information. So if I wanted to say what was the processing priority, and then if there are any access restrictions, which probably just means is the checkbox clicked or not, I could save this. And then if I come back over and refresh my screen, now you can see processing priority and access restrictions are also there. If I then download the CSV and open that up, you can see that these are all here. If I select a couple, it has no impact on the download CSV. The download brings back everything in the search results on the page. If I were, for example, and so it doesn't just bring back the 2 that I clicked or however many I clicked, it brings back everything. So if I were, for example, to go to resources and say show components, so I've got 5,000 lines. If I create the download CSV, even if I only click 10, all 5,000 will come down. If I filter it, then whatever that result is, just say, what's a good one? Down to 20, hit download CSV. Here's my 20, and there's a resource and an archival object. But again, as an example, if I click 4 of them, download CSV, I still get the 20. So just be aware of that. It can be handy for summarizing and crunching certain bits of data depending on how you filter it, what you want to display. You can take that CSV and of course, turn it into charts, do whatever you want to do with that. But this works the same way across all the modules. So for example, subjects, it would bring down all of these fields in addition to anything else that you wanted to bring down that was an option based on the subject browse columns. So again, you could alter this to provide other information. Actually, I think that's almost a duplicate. Maybe the URI. Say preferences and refresh the screen. I think that it should have added the global. Maybe I didn't save it. Perils of live demos. It should save the preferences and then ideally, upon refreshing this, it would show the URI, but it's being a little slow. It should do that. And then it will download the CSV as a list of all of the subjects here, ideally with the fields it's supposed to. The next thing we can do, and I want to point this out particularly for accessions, is if I go into either view or edit, it should have the same download or export options regardless of, again, which mode that you're in. So in this case, if I go to edit, you'll notice up here this is normally where export would be, but there isn't one. There's not a module export for accession records. To get accession record information out, you really have to go over to reports or run something against the backend. In part, that's because I think we're still working on standards and what sort of default mapping should be for an archival accession record. I know there's accessioning best practices working group going on. And so hopefully at some point something will come out of that. But it wasn't for ArchivesSpace to necessarily, define for itself what an export and how that should map for an accession record. So there isn't one here. If we start going over to resources and we start walking through, I'm going to pull up again. I'm just going to pull one up here I'll click on Krispy Kreme, pull it up in view mode. And here you can see where export shows up. There are a number of different export options for the resource record. And we're going to run through them just briefly in order. You can download the CSV. I'm sorry, CSV, I'm ahead of myself. The EAD, and you have the option of including unpublished tags. This might be useful if you have notes that are not necessarily meant to be public, but you nevertheless want staff to review them. You need to do something else. So you can include things that aren't published yet if you need to. You would just click that box, and you can include digital archival object tags if you wanted to. You could use numbered or not numbered C tags. If you're using the C tags, which are the component tags in the EAD standard, you can go down 12 levels. So you'd have CO1 through C12. If you do not number the C tags, there's not really, I haven't encountered a limit yet about how deep you can go. So you could potentially dump out more than 12 levels of hierarchy. I've actually seen a finding aid that does that. And whether or not all of that displays would depend on whatever style sheet you're running it against or whatever display system you're using, and whether or not that is limited in how deep it would go. So that's one place where you might choose to use this or not. You can also dump out the EAD. The default is the EAD 2002, but you can choose to dump this out in EAD 3 if you choose to do that. When you download it, and I just clicked on it, and here's this one. And I have Oxygen as a system, and so my system's automatically set to open this up in Oxygen by default, which is what it's going to try and do. And never mind that. So this is what it looks like in Oxygen. I make it pretty. Brings out all of the data going all the way down, which you can then use as you need to. If you have a system like Oxygen, I can also put a secondary style sheet in here, so I could take this data and manipulate it into something else with a different form or variety of PDF. I could convert it to something else and play with it from here. The other next thing you can do, you can download Mark XML. Also, again, you have the option of including any unpublished fields. And published, of course, means whether or not some of these, for example, notes down in here are published. So if you have notes, elements thereof that you have or haven't published, maybe it's not ready for prime time and you don't want to send it to the public user interface just yet. If you're using the public user interface, this will give you a chance to review it. So again, simply download Mark XML. And you can, I could open this in Oxygen. I could save it off to one side. if I wanted to. And then if I wanted to potentially open this in Mark Edit, do some additional, actually, it wants me to open it directly. And this is Mark Tests. Where's my folder? If I needed to do some additional manipulation on it to get it in to another system, I might need to tweak what comes out, depending on what else I may or may not want to add. So I could use a tool like this to open it up and play with it. When you're dumping out Mark for a resource, keep in mind that it does only export the main level information. It doesn't export, the children. It's just the main level collection level information that comes out. Next option, container labels. So for this one, the idea behind this is, again, it will open up a background job if you click on it. And it will bring out the top container information in a CSV form so that then you could manipulate it for some sort of bulk printing of labels if you needed to. This is taking a little longer than I would guess for the number of boxes that are in that find mode. I'll come back to this in a second. It's still working on it. And then the other export option here, Malaka already ran through the download container template and re-importing that, so I won't cover that. Then the last one is, of course, generate PDF. And in this case, again, option to include unpublished tags or not. And the generate PDF will generate based on the style sheet that's built into ArchivesSpace in the back end. That is a document that can be edited and then put back into place, but you'd have to work with your hosting, your internal sysadmin folks or your hosting provider to actually edit it and then put it back in if you wanted it to look like something that wasn't sort of out of the box like this. The other option, again, would be downloading the EAD, having your own style sheet in the background and generating a different version of a PDF or transforming it to a different sort of XML in the background. So to do this one, okay, let me run back very quickly before I generate the PDF. It looks like this completed. And this is actually, I was wrong, it's tab separated values. And I think if I opened this in something other than WordPad, you would see labels here, which again, you could then configure. And it looks like it runs about like that. For example, would be a label. And you could decide how many, if you wanted the actual location to be on your label or not. Yeah, you may not. Actually, the label actually will even show the size of the container. So this is something, again, if I opened this in, let me try this in Excel, which might work a little better. Oh, well, I'll come back to that if we have time and open it so you can actually see it in tab and get that to open. I need to save it off to one side and then I'll do that. Let's go back very quickly to generate the PDF. All you really have to do is hit the button. This also will open a background job. Refresh the page. Download the PDF. And again, this is out of the box style sheet. Folks still like this on occasion to circulate before it goes into the public user interface or some other sort of display system. For example, internally, we use this to circulate either as a PDF or printed form, depending on what people want to do, so they can mark up, edit, annotate, catch things. Where I am also, we have some finding aids that are for staff only, and we can't put in our other display systems. So if I have to produce a finding aid for staff, this is how I might deliver it to them, as opposed to a more public-facing display system. So there's that. So that's resources. Any questions at this point? If not, I'll go ahead and we'll move on to digital objects. And there are a couple of download options here. And I'm gonna look for a more complicated digital object example. This is one that actually has some structure and children. Just imagine, if you will, that this is reflecting a potential set of network born digital files. And so there could be hierarchy, there could be structures. There are, in addition, again, to that front CSV export, internally, we also have a number of different export options. In this case, it sort of depends whether or not these are useful for you on what your fundamental workflows are. So if this is your place of record for this information, and you want to download mods, mets, or DC to import into another system, this might be where you generate those records. In other cases, this may be simply pointing to something that already lives in a digital repository or something elsewhere. Most of your metadata is over there, and so this might be a fairly minimal record. But if you need to generate it for use in a separate system, you can download the Dublin Core in order of complexity, Dublin Core, mods, and then METs, which would incorporate mods or Dublin Core for the descriptive metadata. So in this particular case, downloading the DC, and so this is all it brings out. It's the simplest. It only brings out sort of the top level of the digital object, doesn't have the children, a little bit of descriptive information, but that's about it. The next most complex, the mods, when it opens this, it brings out a bit more. So it brings out the children. You can see some of the structure that's here, but it doesn't include the digital objects. It's just a little bit more than you would have gotten in terms of descriptive information for this digital content. Again, the more robust options that include both the structural metadata, the digital objects, and the descriptive information would be the METS records, of course. And we'll do each of them. So if Dublin Core is what you want for the description, you simply download the METs. And you can see it's bringing it out with DC elements involved. And in this case, it has the digital object links come out. Has a more complete structural map. If whatever system you're loading it into, again, prefers mods. Oops, I meant to do the METs with mods. This should do it. Again, you can see it's actually using that standard. Still wrapped in the METS structure. And again, of course, once these are out, if you need to tweak them, edit them or something for any particular vagaries or idiosyncrasies of getting things from this system to your own, you can use this. You can use whatever other system will enable you to edit XML. Any questions here? In this case, we'll run over to agents. And number of agents, again, download CSV, as with the rest of them. When you're actually in, and I pulled down, there's a more complex record I loaded in earlier. I pull it up in view. And so this is, again, fair amount of information in here. We have two options for exporting. And this one, just note that this has download, two different buttons for download as opposed to an export with some options underneath that. So this one, the display is a little bit different, but it's the same thing. It's all exports. So in this case, we're going to download EAC CPF. I'm going to close some of these so we have less junk. This comes down. You could then potentially, if this was your place of record for a particular person and you wanted to load it to Snack, you could do that. Again, you may have to, because I'm in Oxygen, sometimes it wants to complain about things a little bit that might not actually be a problem, depending on what you're loading it into. So take a look. Sometimes the exports, can be a little wonky, and you do have to fix them. Sometimes it depends on the interplay between the two systems. Sometimes it's actually fine, and it's what I'm looking at it in is complaining about something that what the system you're loading it into may not care about. So if you see a little bit of red on here, that's not necessarily to panic. But this is where this comes from. It brings out whatever it can, however it's mapped. As Malaka pointed out at the beginning, some of the mapping documents are on archivespace.org. If you want to see how things are sort of dumping out and what mapping is. And then the other one here, download the Mark XML authority. And we could bring this down. Again, if this was your place of record for a user and you wanted to bring it into another system, you could bring this down and then potentially load this into your library catalog or some other place if you were the authorized, if this was the authorized version of a name. Because this is Pablo Picasso and I already downloaded it from LC, I would probably download from LC to send into other systems, but this is here. And you could potentially do as you need to with it. Don't need to save that. Oh. So that's, I believe, all of the exports through the main modules. So for example, locations, there isn't one. Either on view or edit. For most of the rest of them, it is just the CSV export, which will get you something. Any questions about exports? And again, in our documentation, I think we've covered them. These are the core elements agents. We've covered those, various resource records. The container levels might need to tweak this because it was clearly coming out as tab separated value. Should be comma separated value, or at least right now it's different. I'm not sure which one it's supposed to be, but it's different. And that can also be opened however you need to. So those are it. Are there any questions on basic exports? I'm a little early on finishing this, but that's because I want to make sure I give us a little bit more time on reports.
We have one question. It says, for digital objects utilizing the exports, would it be possible to round trip / batch edit and re-import digital object information?
I think the question would be whether or not, because digital objects should have identifiers the way that other elements do. I suspect that if you tried, you could certainly download them, you could re-import them, but if the identifiers matched, it probably wouldn't let you import it because it would think the record already existed. If they came back in without identifiers, it wouldn't know that and it would bring them back in, but then you may have to relink everything.
Yeah, I think it's just like the resource record. You
Yeah,
can't use these spreadsheets to
do that kind of
thing.
updating, editing.
Yeah. And that's the only question.
Yeah, basic exports aren't too, it brings out what it brings out. And then the harder part is sometimes if it's not exactly what you wanted, then how do you tweak it to get it to the next stage of what you wanted to do with that data? And that's a little repository specific, system specific. But showing the actual exports isn't as complex as imports. But then there are reports. So yeah, I'm going to try and buy us a little bit more time to talk about reports, and conversations about that can hopefully go on before the end of our time together. So I'm going to bounce over and get rid of some of these. So we're going to come over first to just straightforward reports. These are sort of baked into the system. And I will say in using these, you'll notice a bunch of them are for accessions, which was intended to help cover some of the issues with the fact that there wasn't a native sort of accession export. So some of the data from accessions you can get out this way. The trick with using some of these reports is that the description of what the report triggers on is not always clear. So for example, the report accessions with rights transferred. This is triggered when the accession has an event record and the event is copyright transfer. There is nothing in the run over to accessions and just edit. There's nothing in this that, if you notice, has anything to do with rights transferred. There's a rights statement and there is information in this, but if you see when I run this particular report, and again, this is, actually, there is no rights statement in this one. Sorry, I was looking in the wrong place. There isn't one here. I think the report that I get out, I'm going to dump it out in CSV, is fresh page, download the report, open it up, and I get one, and it has rights transferred. And in my testing for this workshop, I was trying sort of different combinations of things. And it was the having an event record with for this particular accession, Native Americans in film. If I view this, once I added the event with copyright transfer, then it started showing up on the report. And so a number of these are kind of built that way. There are a number of different ways of doing things in the system. And it's really challenging to build a baked-in report that might handle all of those various ways. So say, for example, if we had an accessions with restrictions report, would it pull from the checkbox that says restrictions apply, access restrictions, use restrictions, all of the above, some combination of the above? So that's the challenge. These built-in reports were for those people who had no other option or way, using the API, pointing a tool against the back end. It was an attempt to provide people with something. But again, which of these, if there were a report of that nature, which would apply, or would it also involve an event of some kind? That's the trick. The other issue, some of these are actually, it's everything. So in this case, there are some reports like the accession receipt that you can actually scope out so that things that were accessioned by which it's most likely this accession date between a certain period, and you can bring that out. If you, for the accession report, it's a much more comprehensive set of data. Actually, I'm going to bring this one out as PDF, but you can't limit it by any date. So you have to bring it all out. And then if you only needed a more detailed report for, say, a 2-year period, you'd have to weed everything else out in your CSV. PDF, of course, that you can't really do that. So it depends on what you want to do. And it doesn't necessarily bring out all fields that are possible in the accession. So these can be useful. They have limitations, and I would, play with them and see what you can do. It's also entirely possible, because I believe that the reports area, both custom and the canned administrative reports, are probably one of the areas of the system that aren't used as heavily as, say, resources. Go figure. And so it is more likely, I won't say more likely, but it is possible that you could run across something that's a little buggy. Or say if a module has updated, perhaps some of those updates haven't made it through to the reports in the back end in this area. So something to watch. I would guess this area, if you find something that really seems wrong, don't hesitate to put in a bug report for it. They should work, but it is really helpful when using these to know the fundamentals of your data. So if you know you're running it and something isn't showing up and you're sure it should be there, again, double check which fields it looks like the report's actually pulling from, and then evaluate whether or not there might be a bug involved. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's not pulling from the field you think it should be. but that can happen. So custom reports, and again, you can't really tweak these. They're just built this way. The thing that was put in a few years back to give you a little bit more control over your reports was this custom report template. And again, whether or not you can see this was, as I said at the beginning, partly dependent on whether or not it's been enabled in your backend by your sysadmin or your hosting provider, and then whether or not you have permissions set to be able to see some of these things. So what you can do, however, is create a custom report template. And then once they're built, anyone who has access to this sort of report can actually run one. So there is within the reports module, custom report where you can, I have one that's already in there. And if there were more, you could choose between them. So once it's built, someone could come here to run an existing custom report, which is a little separate than building the custom report, which you do here through the little gear drop down. So we're going to come over and we're going to build one. When you first come in, this will be blank, and you'll simply hit create template to build one. Once you build one and save it, you'll see it show up here in the list with the view, edit, run, copy, delete options. To view it, you can simply open it up to see what fields have been selected for this particular report. And you'll notice both here, a lot of these are coming back. The core fields are listed in alphabetical order, which means that, you know, if let's say, for example, you have a range column shelf situation, that might display in your CSV output before the room and the floor that the storage room is on. So just be aware this does reflect the order of fields as they come out, at least in the CSV. And if I go back to custom report templates, I could run it from here. I could copy it and use it as the basis for another report, or I could simply delete it. If I want to, in this case, I'm going to pull it open to edit it. We'll create a new one here in a second. And what I did was I just gave it a name, which is required. I said, and keep an eye on this. It's asking how many records do you want to come back? There are probably more than 1,000 location records in here. As this gets bigger, clearly it's going to be a heavier duty report to run. But if you only limit it to 100, you know, if you want a list of all of your agents and you're limiting this to 100, you're not going to get them. So you need to sort of watch how many records you're actually requesting. And then you can choose which fields you want to have come out and display as part of your report data. And so these are the ones that I've selected. Note, you can link records. So it would be and this is not a filter. So it does not limit my locations to only those that have resources. It brings out the first 1,000 locations and shows which of them happen to be associated with resources. So again, this linked records is not a filter. It's just adding some additional information to the core of what you're bringing out, which is in this case, the list of records, location records. And I don't believe I have edited that, but I'm going to go ahead and run it. And once I run it, I have the option of dumping it out in JSON, CSV, HTML, PDF, or RTF. I'm going to pick CSV, start the job. Refresh the page, download the report. There it is. So in this case, I asked it for 1,000 records. It brought them out. And notice some of these I asked it for resource records, and there isn't any. So this is within our test system here. There's nothing assigned to this location. As I scroll down, I start to see a few things that are. And then I found a bunch more. So again, the selecting the other module to associate it with does not limit, it simply adds. And in this case, what it does when it added is up here, when nothing's assigned to it, each location gets its own line. Once it's added, it starts expanding it. So if I have 6 boxes at this location, it broke it out into 6 lines. Never mind the shelf 2, but so there are 6 things here. So watch how the data behaves when it comes out, especially if you want to start manipulating it for other purposes. And play with these a little bit. This is also an area that, again, not as heavily used, so maybe in some need of a little bit more assistance. A lot of these work pretty well. I'm going to create a new template, and I'm going to do agent test. And here I would select, this is the module I want to pull it from. So maybe I want to pull agents. And I want to display the type. I want to show the name. And maybe I want to show all of the resources they're associated with. I could then, if I wanted to sort this by a particular field, and again, these will change depending on which module type I select at the top up here. That changing this alters the basic information fields I can choose from. I save this. I can then run it. Download it, take a look. Come on. There it is. So here are the people, the resource it's used in, how it's associated. So in this case, this particular person, Ernest Rodriguez, is both the creator and the subject. So when that happens, it comes out twice. And here are the names. What I stumbled across with this one along the way in my testing in prepping again for this workshop, and I do need to report this as a, as a bug. So let's go back. Let's say I want to edit this. And let's say if I want to filter it just down to the people, narrow by value, I'm going to save that. If I run it, and in this case, if you look at after I filtered it, if I look at the log up here at the top, and this I do need to report as a bug since I spotted it. It looks like somewhere in the system, in the background code, it's agent type narrow, and there's no underscore between agent and type. Did you mean this? And so somewhere, I think in the back end, there's a typo, frankly. And so I need to report this as a bug. But this sort of thing sort of can happen. Again, if you see it, please report them. These get better as they get feedback on them. The development process, again, puts effort into the things that people talk to them about. And as someone who was involved in trying to help with reports in the early days, we had a hard time getting feedback from the community on what reports should do, how they should behave, what they should pull from, what kind of fields. So again, the more feedback the community provides on these, the better. Because I think this would be a simple fix, probably somewhere in the background. We just need to point out that there's probably a typo in the backend code. So these sorts of things one can stumble across. Any questions right now about either the reports or the custom reports?
No, well, I guess it's really a question slash observation. Um, I'm sorry, what do you call it? Feedback. I'm getting feedback. So I apologize if you guys are also. Um, when you do the dates, I was like, I want it from June 1st to June 31st. If you well, June 30th. If you actually want June 30th, you have to put the date as July 1st. Did you want to explain why that happens?
It would
Or did,
depend on what the cutoff. So I probably in the back end, it's probably the full like Greenwich mean, very long thing. So if you want it to include let me act. Where's my reports? Okay, so I'm going back to report. And this accession receipt report. So in this case, again, you have to play with it a little bit to know that this is how it works. It's from the date to the other one, but it doesn't include those. So if you want everything for a given calendar year, play with it a little bit. You may want to enter 12/31, 2022 to actually be down. To probably 2020, like 024 dash 01 dash 1. And that would probably, where's my dash 01. That would probably get you the entirety of 2023.
Yeah, it's been my experience that they do the full date with the seconds and the milliseconds and all that. So your date cutoff, especially the to date, is like a micro millisecond after.
Yep.
And so yeah, you're not getting that day. So
You're
you
not
have to
getting it.
put in.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. The 2 is the bigger culprit. But play with it to see what you get back. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Again, I would just stress this area of the system will get better with increased community input and interest. So here's that. So let me just quickly show. So there are other, I wish that we had time, and I believe the ArchivesSpace training team, the discussion of additional training or at least another workshop using the API to pull data, manipulate it. That's sort of, I think at our last training sessions, it does get discussed quite a bit. So I think at some point there's hope of teaching another API workshop again. It is trickier, it is more technically complex, and it's harder to do remotely than in person, because sometimes it does involve, instructor coming and standing over your shoulder to figure out why something is or isn't working. So that is really a much more robust way of dealing with pulling data, potentially manipulating it, putting it back in, and those sorts of efforts. What we're trying to demonstrate here is what you can do natively through the front end interface. The other thing that people can do is, and this is sort of summarized again in the workbook that comes along with this. Again, API, it is, and as I mentioned, it is possible to tweak the style sheet. You can also get involved in writing plugins to, again, export data in different ways, and play with that. And then a number of people, I'm among them on the side, do actually use secondary tools to point against the back end. Now, your ability to set that up is also dependent on, for example, setting up an ODBC connection or something like that with your hosting, through your hosting provider or through your IT admin. Systems people use are MySQL, MySQL sort of community. And I use, for example, and this is not an advertise, I'm not like promoting Crystal reports. I happen to have it, so I use it and point it against the back end. And so just as an example of some of the things that you can do once you are actually pointing against the back end tables, I pulled up a few of the reports that I've built and used over the years. One thing that's always handy to have handy is this is a list of all of the enumeration values. So these are all of the set parts of the drop-down menus, the control value lists, and the numeric values that are associated with them. So for example, this is the processing status for resources. And these are the words that are used, but in the background tables, these numbers are used. So if I'm pulling resource data and it's just sort of raw, I'm seeing for a collection for the field that says processing status, I see this number. And so I have just a little handy report I built in the background. It just says, okay, put the value together. There are a couple different tables, put the value together with the number so I know how it's going to translate. And I just have it as a handy cheat sheet if I want to force one of these numbers to appear as the letters and the word in a report. And then I can go into this and I can, for example, all of my accessions over the years in this one particular repository, I can build it out as a chart. So here's how much we got. I can include what all of the actual accessions were and how much material they were one by one. I can actually also pull this out in addition to, I've got it for linear feet. I've also got it for how many gig we acquired. I can pull the same thing out as a chart and then manipulate it different ways. I can pull up based on the processing status and whatever fields I want to use, like where we are as a chart. So it depends on what story I want to tell for whom. And then I can tweak these once I have the reports built. I just hit the button to rerun them and it updates it with all of the most recent data from ArchivesSpace. I've also can sort it out a different way. So we use, for example, classifications. And so based on the classification and the chunk of records we're talking about, I can, here's, again, depending on who I'm showing it to, what kind of chart they want to see, here's where we are on this. And again, I can either like this needs significant work or this is, we've at least got some kind of inventory for it. So I can break it up even on the same page in slightly different ways. And I have a host of reports that I play with and tweak and build. Again, it's little particular to whatever tools you have at hand or have access to, what your IT department or your service provider will allow you to do. And then what, in terms of accessing the backend databases, something about Crystal that's nice is you actually cannot write back. So I cannot tweak things here and then upload it to ArchivesSpace. I can simply pull data. That reduces the possibility of doing something horrible in your system. The API gives you a little bit more ability to do something horrible. But using this gives our IT folks a little bit more comfort because I can't accidentally do something bad by writing back. So those are options. And so again, the report side, I still sort of personally feel that the report side in the system needs probably a lot of development support. But with the increasing use of the API, it goes back and forth in the community about whether or not this is a place to focus on development, or if we just want to rely on IT support to help us using the API, or if we have our own personal skills in using the API. So I think that's probably a conversation for the community about where to do that, especially for those small institutions that don't have a lot of IT support.
So Nancy, we did get a question. For custom reports, is it possible to configure the template to return more than 50,000 lines? I think that's what the maximum was.
That's an interesting question, because I was thinking about that. If you did, so this is the ASpace help documentation, and I don't think it particularly says in here. A lot of times these values are configurable within the system. And right now it's looking like these are the options. I don't actually know if it is possible to check in the backend configuration files whether you can put in a different number, like 100,000. I know that you can, for example, with the browse return, that is, I think, by default set to about 10. You can make that much larger and bring back a lot more records. I don't know if this is a config, alterable config setting.
Yeah, I don't know if it is either, but I do know that Christine had that added because the reports are such a resource hog that
Yeah.
you know, if
Yeah,
like on my system, if I tried to download all the agents, everybody would be out of work for the day.
Yeah.
I know Nancy uses Crystal reports. I could share my screen and show how I use Access with
Go
Oracle
for it.
ODBC. All right, let's see. So you got to stop sharing first. Share. That one. Share. So yeah, I use Access. Again, I think people use what they're comfortable with, and we've had Voyager since 1999, and I've been getting stuff out of it using Oracle and Access for ages. So when I figured out how to do it for ArchivesSpace, I just never went back. So yeah, you have to have the Oracle connection, and then you download the tables, and the table, what is it? I thought it was, yeah. So you would then create reports. I have some reports that I run frequently. As you know, the agent names, depending on your settings, either come in published or they come in unpublished. We have ours set to be not published right away, so we have to actually publish them as we go, and people are always forgetting. So I have a report that gives me all the names that haven't been published, and then I could go in and fix them. That is actually a combination of two reports, the agent person and the name person. And then I have this one that is the user, because as you know, every user, staff user in ArchivesSpace also gets a record, and those should be not published.
Yeah.
And and so then this third one actually takes both of those and munges them together. So I only have to run the one report. I just had to create two other queries to get it. That one I run frequently. I have one that gets me subject headings in a report. There's digital objects, family names with the rules, unpublished note. Oh, the unpublished. You know, especially when you're doing additions, right? The whole record might be published, but you're adding a series that's not published, and then you forget to publish it when you're done. So this kind of, you know, at the note level, you have to publish each note, etc. So this gives me a list of all the stuff that's not published notes that aren't published. I have one for resources and I have one for archival objects. So those are pretty handy. Personal names with no records at all. Yeah, it's handy to do these sort of things. Family names, I could run that one. That one's probably got 553. So I have it make the table. So then all I need to do is come up here to family names. That's the family names with roles, but we could look at that. Da, da, da. So, ta-da, those are our family names. They really need to be worked on. So I have like Nancy said, this is just a read-only database, so I can't go back and mess things up at all, which is nice. I could just get the information and create whatever kind of reports I want, because I could leave them as access tables, which I usually do, but you could also download access tables as Excel if you would prefer. And Nancy was talking about the report she used, so that the number equals the value. That's in this enumeration value table. So I usually have to include that in any report so that I can get the words instead of the number. But yeah, at least I don't need to have them memorized. I just go, oh, pull that table over and give me that value. Because yeah, here's the names of them. Dun, dun, dun. So there you go. There's other ways to get reports, and that's probably why I don't use the report module much in ArchivesSpace, because I could just pull out whatever I need. That being said, notes are such a large, it's called a memo field in Access. So it's just a blob. So I can't like search for kernel mustard in a note. It's just not going to show up here. But I have other avenues of getting that. We have set up EAD backup of our database that I think it's nightly, that anything that was new or updated, then we'll get a new EAD in our repository. It's for people to crawl, like Archive Grid uses that to crawl. And so I could just download those and do other kind of searching in other kind of databases. I mean, like Notepad++ or Notepad Pro, those kind of things. Probably Oxygen, but I don't have Oxygen. All right, I will stop sharing.
And we have one more in the Q&A. It's a little deflating. The reports portion here is as much about workarounds as using ASpace. Are there plans from ASpace to upgrade the reports at all? This is sort of what I was saying earlier. I think ASpace tends to, wherever the community is applying the most pressure for system functionality, that's what it's going to kind of focus on. So I think reports is a place that would really benefit a lot of folks who either don't have access to some of the tools that we're talking about, or just want to see general improvement. It would have to come from the community. So it might be putting in a development request or enhancement request to build a report that can get me this kind of data. It might be to, if you see a bug fix, something that it's buggy, go ahead and put it in. Or if you want to actually, potentially join one of the committees and say, we need to do better descriptions of what these reports are and what fields they're pulling on, because that would help people. So there are ways of getting involved to potentially help improve some of this functionality. Because I think there's so much you can do with the data that's in here. It's just always been a little tricky to get to it through the front end staff interface. And we still have 15 minutes. And I think we just, thank you, Bailey Grace, just put in the place to report bugs in the chat. And also, I think the next time there's a survey that goes out from the training team or other places saying like, what kind of workshops do you want to see? If there are, again, someone in the chat is saying the API workshop would be wonderful. It's something, again, that the training team does discuss, but certainly we don't get as many requests for that as we do for, creating a basic record, or can we do digital objects again, some of the others. So, the ASpace team does, I think, try to be very responsive to community requests. You just need to put in the requests.
We have a question of, does anyone know of a list of commonly useful reports? They're trying to cut down on the time spending exploring all those reports. I know the accessions, the outstanding accessions ones get used, obviously, so
Yeah.
people have a list of what's next.
And otherwise, I know it's not uncommon for this particular workshop to take a little less than 3 hours. So if we don't have more questions, we can call it. But you do have us here for potentially another 15 minutes. So if there are questions about anything we have covered today, please don't hesitate to throw them in the chat while you have us here. Or the Q&A. And for those who want to drop off, thank you for attending, and again, we do pay attention to the survey results. I think there should be a link to a survey for how we can improve this, what else we could do, etc. And we do read those and pay attention to them. So if you have the time to fill them out, please do so.
Well, I guess we could go ahead and leave.
Yeah, I think
Stop recording and
there
all.
are only about, I think, 16 people left in there. So unless any of them